The following program is a resume of the historical styles of architecture to be found in this area. This program makes no pretense at being a comprehensive report. In some cases, minor variants on styles have been eliminated in favor of brevity and clarity. Rather, it is hoped that this will serve as a convenient guide to those examining the well-known examples of local architecture. As human beings, we all have our own taste in cars, clothing, hairstyles, even decorating our walls. Hi, I'm Kenny Kiss Kiss. For the next half hour, we're going to take a look at some of the houses in and around Springfield and find out whose taste influenced the way the house was built. So take a look real close. Some of these houses may be in your neighborhood. Although a number of settlements were made in Clark County in the late 1790s and James DeMint platted Springfield in 1801, no known specimen of a house survives from this early period. The homes of this era, the traditional log cabin, were extremely simple affairs, built of logs smoothed on two sides and notched at the ends to interlock with cross walls. They were usually designed with one or two rooms on a ground floor, heated by a fireplace, and were not intended to be permanent. As the settler prospered, it was expected that he would build a more substantial home. Thus, most of these early homes have vanished. The Springfield Centennial Cabin, built in 1901 and now located in the 500 block of East High Street, is an approximation of one such cabin. The style, however, did not die a quick death and continued to be used with increasing sophistication well into the 1830s. In the first 2 decades of the 19th century, Clark County settlers began to construct more permanent homes. They tended to build from homes they had left in the east and south. These were usually simplified forms of the neoclassical architecture of Georgian England. Many of the colonial homes built after 1900 suggest this style. Translated into American Federal style, their new Ohio homes became simpler, more severe forms of those they had left. Common were 2 floors of 2 rooms each, with chimneys built at either end and a central doorway on one side. Sometimes a kitchen wing, which was 1 story, was built at the end or back. Interiors were simple with white plastered walls, wooden chair rails, and cupboards beside the fireplaces. The oldest known example here is the Jonathan Donnell House on Lower Valley Pike. Built of locally quarried limestone, it was finished about 1811 or 1812. The only major variant of this style is the bank style. Built on the slope of a hill, it has several levels. The Hertzler House in Clark Park and the Dr. Heaston House at 3115 West National Road are typical, originating in Pennsylvania. So is the house at 2050 East Home Road. A minor variant has 2 chimneys at each end, individual or joined by brickwork, called bridged chimneys. From 1821 to 1827, Greece carried on a war of independence from Turkey. America was naturally drawn to a contest so like its own, and by the end of the war, everyone wanted a Grecian temple for home or office. From 1830 to 1850, the most popular style of architecture was patterned after the antiquities of Greece and has come to be known as the Greek Revival style. Architects such as Asher Benjamin and Menard Lefevre produced plan books that were widely disseminated over the United States, allowing not only professional architects, but also simple carpenter contractors to build Grecian homes for their clients. Of the available models, the Parthenon and the Greek temples of southern Italy in the Doric mode were the easiest to copy, especially in wood or brick, the usual frontier materials. They were also the most adaptable to various building sizes and purposes. Greek Revival featured, in its grander examples, a building which was viewed on its short end with a roof brought out into a rather flat, triangular pediment supported by columns. These columns might be real or merely shallow projections of the front wall of the house. In the latter case, they are called pilasters if in the middle, or anti if in the ends. There are numerous variations on the style. What is often still found in Springfield is the Greek Revival cottage, where the long side of the house was used. A recessed porch with two supporting columns was placed midway along the side, and this plus decorative moldings created the Grecian motif. The Huffman Dr. Riley House at Spring Street and Selma Road is an example of the larger Greek Revival house. The Star Cottage at the southwest corner of Pleasant and Vine Streets, built about 1835, and the Weldon home, 1101 Rice Street, built about 1830, are both in the cottage mode. For many builders, the Greek Revival style was short-lived. They shrank the frontal columns into pilasters, simplified the moldings and other decorations, and finally eliminated the pilasters or ante altogether, leaving only the triangular pediment. In time, even the bottom edge or cornice of the pediment was continued only a short ways in from the eaves. This simplification into a nondescript but universal style produced a whole generation of what are now called vernacular houses. As early as the 1780s, the new literary fashion known as the Gothic novel, which was filled with romance amid the ruins of castles, cathedrals, and monasteries, had spurred a new interest in the architecture of the latter Middle Ages. The leading novelist Horace Walpole had his own Gothic mansion built, as did many other wealthy Englishmen. There are numerous small houses throughout the city with a slight Gothic flavor, but only two with the true characteristics. These marks of the genuine Gothic cottage are a steeply slanted roof, windows rounded at the top and coming to a point, with restrained barge boards or gingerbread on the eaves. The two houses at 321 and 325 South Yellow Spring Street are the only well-known examples of the style in Springfield. Another example was moved south on Route 68 some years ago to the Yellow Springs area. It is the windows and roofs that characterize the Yellow Spring Street cottages, as they lack any scrollwork on the eaves, although one does have the standard finials on the gable peaks. Gothic Revival architecture usually takes two forms: smaller homes, such as described above, and mansions which adopt a Tudor character with square stone tower-like sections, sometimes even battlemented. Such Tudor mansions do not seem to have been built in Springfield until the turn of the century or later. These are thus a revival of a revival. During the Gothic Revival period, numerous nondescript vernacular houses of earlier construction were converted to the style by adding a dormer on the long side of the roof and fitting it with a Gothic window. These conversion or modernizations can be found throughout Clark County. At the time that the Gothic Revival was at its height, a new style of architecture began to appear in America, the Italianate. Although it had been long practiced in Europe, especially England, it was not popular in the United States until the late 1840s. By that time, Americans in large numbers were beginning to take the grand tour of Europe as a finishing touch to their education, as the English had long done. The style is derived from the country houses of central and northern Italy and is found in three forms. The windows of an Italianate house are one of its most distinguishing features. Up to the Civil War, the most popular shape of window was rectangular with a semicircular top and a lintel or dripstone placed around the semicircular part. Less popular was the Renaissance style, which was a truly rectangular window with classic moldings. After the Civil War, both styles coexisted, sometimes mingled in the same house. The Italianate house flourished up to the end of the Civil War and then gave ground to other fashions. However, it continued to be built, especially the cubic box form, well into the 1880s, with only the window dressings and door frames being changed in type of decoration. This box form was immensely popular for approximately 30 years, approximately 1850 to 1880, and became a national building style. It is found everywhere in Springfield, especially in examples of frame construction with the minimal amount of decoration. Although the technical details of the architecture of the Italian Renaissance had long been known abroad and had been practiced in England in the early 19th century, it was not until after the Civil War that the style became popular in the United States. Previous to the war, it was principally window details of the Renaissance that were employed in American buildings. With the rise of numerous great fortunes to the wartime economy and the resulting stratification of the social structure, a more formal and monumental style of architecture was demanded by many, especially the wealthy. The Italian Renaissance suited this need admirably. The changes from the simple Italianate house to one of the Renaissance style were not complex, except in the cases of very elaborate mansions. The windows continued to be long, but the tops were either square or only slightly arched. The dripstone lintels were embellished with machine-cut carving, and a keystone with carving was inserted in the middle, usually just for decoration. The Italianate house traditionally had 3 openings across the front. The center section of the door on the first floor and the window on the second was brought forward with a triangular pediment or gable at the top running back into the standard low-hipped roof. Modified classical pilasters usually framed the front door, and brackets continued to be used at the eaves. These houses, like the Italianate, could be built of any material, but the rich usually had at least the front side faced with cut stone. In Springfield, there are 2 outstanding Renaissance houses, the Reinhardt Bowman House at 815 East High Street and the John Foose House at 810 East High Street. Both of these mansions are for the wealthy. The ordinary man settled for approximations in wood or brick, such as the house at the corner of Spring and Pleasant Streets. Concurrent with the development of the Italian Renaissance style was that of what, for lack of a better name, can be called American Renaissance. This was popularized by the American architect Samuel Sloan and is but a vernacularized version of the true Renaissance style. It features the typical L-shaped arrangement of the tower form of Italianate, but without the tower. The windows are usually rectangular with classical lintels, but the roof is a simple pitched roof, not the low-hipped version. The most striking feature is the entablature. This is the area under the eaves to which the eaves brackets are attached. In the American, like the Italian Renaissance style, this entablature is heavily paneled and sometimes fitted with narrow horizontal windows for lighting the attic. These are sometimes called eyebrow windows. The eaves brackets are quite often of an elaborate scroll nature. As a house style, the American Renaissance was immensely popular, but only for a short period. It did, however, become quickly adapted by carpenters and builders who stripped away the elaborate entablature panels, simplified the window lintels, and even removed eaves brackets. The result was a nondescript house retaining only the floor plan of the original, but which was easy to build and proliferated all over the country. The best example of the true American Renaissance is the Greater Springfield Daycare Center, formerly the Ellen L. Bushnell House at 825 East High Street. Soon after 1849, when Louis Napoleon Bonaparte became the French emperor, he began remodeling all of Paris. His architect, the Prussian Baron Haussmann, cut the grand boulevards and lined them with apartment buildings. Most of these were built in a modified Renaissance style with a type of roof invented by the 17th century architect Francois Mansart. Such a roof rises from the eaves at a sharp angle. About 2/3 of the height of the roof, its angle abruptly changes to a very shallow one. Thus, the roof has 2 sections, each with its own angle. The financier of the Revolutionary War, Robert Morris, had built a Philadelphia house with such a roof. However, it was after the Paris exhibitions of 1855 and 1867 that the Americans began to copy the Parisians. Particularly, following the Civil War, everything from the Army-Navy building in Washington to the humblest cottage sported a mansard roof. The building could be almost any style, though a rather severe form of Italian Renaissance was most common. The mansard roof often had dormers which were decorated with scroll-cut wooden side panels. These dormers appeared on the eaves part of the roof. The roof could be straight, concave, or convex, roofed with shingles or slates. The upper section was usually flat, covered with sheet metal. The variety of mansard roof buildings is endless. Some are quite simple and chaste, like the French prototypes. Others had jigsaw decorations, since after the Civil War, building was dominated by machine-sawed materials. Springfield still boasts several splendid examples of the Second Empire or mansard style, notably the Warren Leffel House at 704 South Fountain Avenue and the Frank Bookwater House at 611 South Fountain. No one period of 19th century architecture is free from overlapping of other styles. While at its zenith, two others were either aborning or dying. This is especially true from 1870 on. The rising population, plus machine-cut materials, and increasing foreign contacts produced many coexisting styles and substyles. Perhaps the earliest to emerge, however, was the Eastlake style. While Napoleon III was still emperor, and while the Italianate and mansard styles were contesting supremacy, an Englishman, Charles Locke Eastlake, published Hints on Household Taste in 1868. Eastlake was an architect. His book featured furniture which was rectangular rather than the current curved style. His furniture was chiefly devoid of ornamentation except for incised lines and circular cutouts. He hearkened back to a more medieval style. Eastlake's book was quickly republished in the United States, and by 1876, Eastlake houses had appeared everywhere. Eastlake himself repudiated any connection with the American versions of his designs, but the style persisted in houses into the 1880s and the furniture into the 1890s. The Eastlake style was an informal, though complex arrangement of rooms around a spacious hallway. Often there was a fireplace in an ingle nook off to one side. The houses, based on this style, are usually framed with several gables and steeply pitched roofs. The porches are vigorously framed, embellished with turned spindles and cutouts, usually in circles or trefoils. Incised lines are found in the flat woodwork. The house at 833 North Fountain and the house at 845 East High are both excellent examples of the Eastlake style. The emphasis that Eastlake has laid on motifs from medieval sources sparked an interest in Romanesque architecture for the rest of the century. The so-called Queen Anne houses of the 1880s and 1890s have nothing to do with that British queen. Some of the early architects of that style may have thought that they were reviving forms of her period. What they did create was a house that had rooms, as in an Eastlake house, but with an even more complicated exterior. They created a variety of exterior elevations by using brick and or stone for the lower floors, with frame and or shingles on the upper floors. They added different gables and overhangs as well. Each elevation had its own treatment. Dramatic contrasts of light and shade were highly desired. Some gables had applied wood decoration in imitation of English half-timbering. These architects in reality were reviving some forms of the period of Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. Thus the style is sometimes called Neo-Jacobean. Perhaps the most unforgettable characteristic of this style was a tower on some corner of the house. Usually rounded, the tower occasionally was a faceted type. Sometimes the tower was moved away from the body of the house, serving as a corner of the veranda. The Johnson House at the northwest corner of Fountain Avenue in Pleasant is a good example of Queen Anne style. So isn't the Gottwald House at 505 North Fountain, and the Remsburg House at 515 North Fountain. Roughly contemporary with the Queen Anne style is the simple Romanesque. It does not differ materially from the former in details, except that it is a name commonly applied to those massive homes built of rock-faced stone or other ashlar masonry in the Romanesque trend of the 80s and 90s. There is perhaps a bit more regularity in the treatment of the gables in this style. A magnificent example of the Romanesque style is the old PP Mast home on West High Street, now the front section of the KP home. Occasionally, the architects of the Romanesque period drew on several sources called eclectic in their designs, even using Flemish and German motifs. The W.S. Thomas Mansion at East High exhibits Flemish gables. The most prominent architect of the 1870s and 1880s was H. Richardson, who had studied in France at the École des Beaux-Arts. Upon his return to America in 1868, he designed a home for himself in fairly conventional style, crossing a mansard roof with a Queen Anne house. Soon, however, Richardson was caught up in the Romanesque movement of the 70s and 80s. By the time of his death in 1886, H. Richardson had evolved his own particular style of Romanesque architecture that came to be imitated everywhere. Richardson continued to use the rock-faced masonry of the simple Romanesque, but varied it with bands of a contrasting color. Unique, too, was his insistence upon a horizontal thrust to the building rather than the vertical ordinarily employed. Richardson also greatly favored airy porte-cocheres over driveways and open arcades and porticos. Overall, there was an air of academic correctness and believability to his designs, rather in contrast to some of the fantastic piles of stone being passed off as Romanesque architecture. In Springfield, there is only one house in Richardson's style, the Governor Bushnell Mansion at 838 East High Street. This house, built in 1888, was designed by one of Richardson's most successful imitators, Robert H. Robertson. In the hands of anyone except himself, Richardson's brand of Romanesque architecture could suffer one of two fates. It could be carefully and subtly executed by a man such as Charles Cregar of Springfield, or it could be mismanaged and end up as a building looking most like a medieval fortress dungeon. In most cases, it was sadly mishandled. Added to this was a growing interest in America's colonial period. At the Centennial in Philadelphia in 1876, a New England kitchen of the 18th century design had caught the public imagination and reawakened an interest in America's past. By 1892, the public was ready for a change, and this was signalized in the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Acre upon acre was filled with shining white buildings, most designed in a Greco-Roman style, from which, of course, so many 18th century homes derived architectural ornament. This signaled the beginning of the neoclassical or colonial revival school of architecture, which finally included several other revivals in the next 30 years. Springfield, like other cities, began to have colonial houses in the 1890s. These homes are scattered over the entire city. Some particularly fine examples are located on North Fountain Boulevard, such as the Diggle House at 1845 North Fountain and the Ronimus home at 16 East Home Road. Once the first step had been taken and houses were designed in a late 18th century mode, it was then a short step to other period styles. The two most prominent types of architecture of the 90s and the early 20th century were the Tudor Elizabethan and the English Dutch Colonial. In the former, the Tudor, an attempt was made to reproduce on a smaller scale the large country mansions of England during the Tudor period around the 15th or 16th century. These had a combination of squared towers and gable-roofed masses. A.J. Downing had promoted the same style in the 1840s to 1850s, but used stone or brick stuccoed to imitate stone as in the originals. On a more modest scale, architects revived the brick and half-timbered houses prevalent in Elizabethan England. An example of two styles in one is the house at 1801 North Fountain Avenue. The half-timbering was often applied wooden decoration, not structural timbers. The English-Dutch colonial designs were an attempt at recreating the 17th century homes in America, such as built by early colonists in New England and New York. These were simply rectangular homes with attached chimneys at the end, the whole topped with a gambrel or barn-type roof. The gambrel is like the mansard in that it has two sections at different angles. However, the gambrel has a bottom section projecting over the house walls. These eaves are much like a Pennsylvania pent roof. The doorway is often recessed. Sometimes small diamond pane windows were installed for authenticity. A good example is at 412 East High Street. Another is at the corner of Fountain and McCrite. The style persisted until the 1930s. The story of Frank Lloyd Wright and his impact on American architecture is too complicated and extensive to be retold here. It is enough to remark that there were at least 3 factors that helped shape and crystallize Wright's ideas. The first of these was that he worked for 6 years as an assistant to Louis Sullivan, the great Chicago innovator in architecture, and deeply imbibed his credo of form follows function. A second factor that influenced Wright was his early love for Japanese prints and the low, open style of architecture they often depicted. The third factor was Wright's own abiding love for nature and his belief that he could create an architecture in harmony with it, in opposition to European styles which he considered artificial. Since Wright's designs were radically unconventional, his clients tended to be both wealthy and highly individualistic in their tastes. In Springfield, the prominent manufacturer and civic leader Burton J. Westcott commissioned Wright to build a house which was erected in 1909 at the corner of High and Greenmont Avenues. Much like the period of 1870 to 1890, when there were so many eclectic styles of building, the period of 1910 to 1930 was just as filled with derivative modes. We have already made mention of the Classical Revival and the English-Dutch Colonial, as well as the Tudor Elizabethan Revival. All continued in vogue, but to them were added the Mission style, as well as a revival of the Italian villa. Just as the East Coast had had its colonial past revitalized in a derivative architecture, so also California and the West began to remember their early days by building in a pseudo-Spanish mission style. The idea was to capture the appearance of an old mission church in an average home. The results varied greatly, but the general characteristics were stuccoed exterior walls, semicircular arched openings, red-tiled roofs, and very often a central parapet with niche. The California Pacific Exposition of 1915 did much to popularize an already voguish style. When translated to the Midwest and East, the style was often adapted to the already popular rectilinear styles of those areas. The result can be seen in the C.I. Weaver House at 2330 East High Street, constructed sometime around 1913. The interior of these homes was usually finished in the medium dark oak woodwork, which was popularized by American aesthete Elbert Hubbard, and which has kept alive the name of the style more so than the architecture. The last of the great eclectic styles in American architecture was conceived during the land boom in Florida in the 1920s. The gentle climate and the Spanish tradition of the early explorers of the peninsula combined to suggest a further use of the mission style. However, architects creating winter homes for northern industrialists and others of wealth found elements of architecture from different parts of the Mediterranean even more suitable to expressing the social station of their clients. The result was a palatial style combining the stuccoed whiteness of the Spanish mission with the formality and ornamental details of the classic Italian Renaissance villa. The results were 2- or 3-storied palazzos with arcaded porticos supported on columns, red-tiled roofs, and elaborate gardens, sometimes reminiscent of the Alhambra. A paradigm of this style is the mansion built by E.E. Greiner, treasurer of the Buffalo Springfield Roller Company, in 1926, just on the east edge of Springfield and now known as the Knisley House. For lack of a better name, we may call it Italo-American Villa or Florida Tourist Palazzo.